Exceptional Randos is produced live in front of a captive audience of two cats and a dog. Today's weather is phenomenal, and I mean so great that I don't have any fans on.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional radio.
Good afternoon. This is like the most beautiful Sunday we've had. Oh, I can't even remember how long it's been since we've had this fantastic of weather. And not just like today, but the last several days has been just incredible. If this is a foretelling of fall, I am all about this. Especially if it becomes really nasty around wintertime and we get some really pretty snow.
I feel like this winter is probably going to be mild again, just because. Well, let me rephrase that. I feel like the temperatures are going to be mild, but there's going to be a shitload of snow in terms of in the Midwest. It's been a fairly dry year, but there's been flooding and just massive precipitation,
Yeah.
fronts where.
Well, I was looking back at weather history for all of the cool periods we've had for the past several months. It seems like every time we get some really nice weather, we're getting just a big blast of wind from Hudson Bay because it's essentially directly north of us, all the way past Canada. And so we're getting this really nice, cool air from up north. And I'm okay with that. If that's going to keep happening, then yeah, we're definitely going to get some cold days. But we also, yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to get a lot of moist, moist winter. And I'm not afraid of that. I'm actually looking forward to something like that because these last few winters of mud have sucked. Especially with all of the sand that ends up on the roads. And I know that that's supposed to help things, but it seems like once spring happens and it dries up, or it stops snowing at least, all of the sand just collects in the worst places.
Well, it's supposed to be an El Nino this year, so I imagine that will. Sometimes it's 60 degrees in January in Indiana.
Yeah, that's always awkward, man. It's in my memory, it's not supposed to be like that, but I guess that's the way it is.
Well, it's almost like the winter has moved to February in terms of it's
Peak
still kind
winter.
of fall.
Yeah.
It's still kind of fall up until January, and then it finally gets deep winter. It's like deep winter overnight until
The end of March.
Beginning of March or beginning of April too. Sometimes it still snows.
Oh yeah, we've had freezes in April. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I've got to remind myself every year when the wisteria decides it's going to start blooming. Everything's waking up, and you see those first the scout bees that the queen sends out to say, hey, is there anything out there? And they go outside and everything's green and beautiful and they're just flying around, and all of a sudden the sun disappears behind a cloud and they drop because the temperature drops 20 degrees.
Yeah, it's like winter has moved. I mean, I guess all the seasons have moved about a month since I was a kid in terms of winter used to start at the end of October,
Yeah.
beginning of November.
Yeah,
I guess it's a
remember
little more than a month.
in 6th grade and 7th grade, there was snow on the ground around Halloween. That was the standard, I think.
Yeah, the standard used to be snow around Halloween. It was usually a little bit later, but there was a couple times when it definitely snowed on Halloween.
I think the first Halloween I ever experienced in Indiana, it snowed. It was the most unexpected and Because I lived in California, it didn't snow there. Snow is this thing that happened in when I visited my grandparents in Kansas, or it happened on TV. It wasn't a thing that happened at the bottom end of the southern end of the bay or Bay Area. You know how like kids these days, there's like some growing percentage of kids who grow up in cities who've never seen the Milky Way, who've never seen like real stars in the night. Like,
Yeah.
uh, I wonder how many kids grew up who've never seen snow on the ground. Like really, like not just like you know manufactured snow, but like so deep that you couldn't even dig to the ground snow. I bet it's a really high percentage of people who grow up have never seen that stuff.
Well, and part of it too is like how many of those people just haven't traveled.
Yeah.
And it's not like, winter is definitely not the time where you travel to areas that snow. Um, but those people, there's like just a lot of Americans that are sedentary, um, and in that just never leave their county, let alone their state. So if you're like in a southern state that never gets snow, you're probably never gonna see snow. Or like, Southern California or some shit. And that's where um it's not even about economic mobility or anything like that. Americans just even in the last, I mean, I guess especially because of COVID, but even before that, there was a declining interest in travel in terms of like within the United States traveling. Because I guess to a certain degree, corporations have homogenized the country to the point where it's like you might as well not go somewhere unless it's explicitly filled with like mom and pop shops where it's like, what are you going to go to a different town to go to their Walmart or a different town and go to their fucking Sears, whatever, I don't know if Sears is even open anymore, but
So it looks like the global average for developed countries that populations have never seen snow is right around 5%. But then you get into subtropical, tropical regions, and it's like 90 to 95% have never seen snow. In the United States, roughly 60% of the population lives in the snow belt, but that doesn't account for population density for cities because I'm pretty sure that, you know, aside from that freak incident of a blizzard in LA recently, a significant portion of that population probably had not seen snow. I bet people who live in San Diego never see snow. And that's a huge city. Um, wow.
well, it's not that big actually.
No,
Maybe the size is big, but it seems like it's not much bigger than Indianapolis.
yeah. I mean, in terms of like, it's a port city. It has a lot of
Oh, the
traffic.
county. Yeah, I guess the
It's a
county.
huge
Yeah.
place. Yeah, I think when I think of San Diego, I'm not thinking of just like the actual like city proper. Like when I think of Indianapolis, it's bigger than Marion County, and it includes all of those little suburb satellite towns like Greenwood and Avon, and that's all.
Well, then that's greater Indianapolis.
Yeah, that's what that. Yeah,
Um, because yeah, there's Indianapolis proper, and then there's greater Indianapolis, which is like
everything
all
outside the
those.
ring.
Yeah, basically.
Estimates for everyone in Europe has seen snow, even the Mediterranean countries. Um, looks like roughly 45% of the people on Earth have never seen snow. for estimate that I found. I don't know how accurate this is. The person who comes up with this that even admits that it's like fuzzy and may not have like enough data to be accurate. So that's just like looking at the map where the snow belt falls. Snowiest cities in the Syracuse, New York, has 114 inches annually. What the?
Yeah, realizing that a lot of these big cities count their counties as their population numbers.
Yeah.
It's very enlightening in terms of like, yeah, Los Angeles County is almost 10 million, but the actual city is not is almost 4.
Looks like Mountain Washington, New Hampshire experiences 283.5 inches per year of annual snowfall. It's the most snowfall in the United States. 20 feet of snow.
Well, and I guess it depends on like that's still a lot of snow no matter when, but if it all happens in the winter months or if it's spread out over the course of a year, and if they're counting like the top of a mountain.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's just like, okay.
Oh, that makes sense because like Michigan, I always read about how the Upper Peninsula gets like 10 or 12 foot snowfall like over the course of a blizzard, and then they've got to get those big ass trucks and
learn like the way that the precipitation percentage is delivered. It's kind of what's the
are
word?
they skewing it with like cumulative data?
No, well, yes, and part of it is the way it's delivered is misleading if you don't get the actual specifics of what it means in terms of like, okay, for example, if there's a 33% chance of rain, that doesn't mean it's like a 1/3 chance that there's going to be rain. It's actually 100% chance that there's going to be rain, but it's going to be spread out over 33% of the area.
Oh yeah.
That's not what most people probably interpret that, because there's always the joke, oh, the weatherman gets the rain right 50% of the time,
Yeah,
but they still get
75%.
Well, no, actually, they get it right almost 100% of the time. We just didn't understand the way they were delivering it, because it's like there's no glossary to a weather report, and there's no like they assume they know what they're talking about. So when meteorologists are saying 33% chance of rain, they're going by their definition, where we're not getting that every single time. So if you didn't,
man, those
see
personal
a meteorology
weather
book or some shit,
those personal weather stations that sometimes they look like weird airplanes or spaceships. They have like a little spinny cap, and these are like you can get into these things for like $150 sometimes, and these are also reporting data to NOAA. So for an area, if there's like 10 people per square mile who have no, if there's one person per square mile who has one of these things, that area's weather reporting data is significant. The accuracy is significantly improved. And so if you've got a distributed network of, let's say there's like in 100 square mile area, and that's not really that big, it's 10 miles by 10 miles. But if you've got even 20 people across that entire area's weather accuracy and reporting information is so accurate. There's like very little error with that kind of distribution of weather monitoring. And some of these things are fancy. They have like lightning detectors that are accurate out to like 20 miles, 25 miles sometimes. Very accurate stuff. So they can pinpoint where lightning strikes are if there's like a net or a network of these things over an area. They can localize lightning strikes to within like a mile, which is incredible. This stuff, the weather reporting now is so high tech. I think you're right. I think that there's a huge gap in general understanding of of the way the weather's reported versus the kind of information that they're getting. Like this is like, to me, it's telemetry.
Oh,
It,
that's exactly what it is.
it's not just like, hey, we're taking snapshots and reporting it. It's like it's real time telemetry. It's probably the most sophisticated monitoring system that civilians have access to.
Well, and since the advent of Doppler, it's like they've been able to take these surveys and give telemetry, but then the overlapping nets of Doppler, it's like you can get a picture of everything basically, and then with all the information, extrapolate based on what's happening and get better extrapolation. So their models at this point are like extremely accurate just because they have so much data. And
Yeah,
that's where it's only like flocks of birds sometimes that like um look like rain, where it's like for the most part it shows everything extremely accurate.
yeah,
And you know, the the way they can predict trajectories of storms, it's like they'll give possible trajectories, and almost every time the possibilities capture where, at least where the storm is going to end up, in terms of like, if they give you three possibilities, if it ends up in one, they got it right.
yeah.
Like it doesn't matter if they gave you two extra possibilities, one of their possibilities was right. So I think that's where, in terms of like their accuracy, is only in the context of them trying to not say this is the definitive outcome, because there's always the possibility that the outcome could change. And then
Yeah, but I think
the more they capture that, the more accurate they are.
yeah, but probability is like complicated math. Probability isn't the kind of thing that I don't think probability is the kind of thing that can just be like delivered via the weather person. Not in a way that's like truly meaningful. They have to sound like, certain at some point, and they are. I just think it's a because I have an interest in it and watching like real time data, real time telemetry of this stuff. It's a very different experience because it all unfolds very differently. Like the snapshot that we're given by the weather reporter is oftentimes like, you know 30 seconds late. And some people get mad about that. And it's not just these like, technology based weather systems. There are a lot of like old timey, you know, uh, barometric pressure based weather weather stations. They can tell you like your ambient pressure and function as like a hydrometer. Um, Tell you your temperature all in one place. You can look at it and know like, oh, the barometric pressure is changing and the temperature is dropping. We're about to get a storm, and you would know this because you could just see it happening. Of course, we also can look at trees and tell when the barometric pressure is changing because the leaves change position. We can all feel temperature changes. People who have arthritic joints can feel pressure changes. So I don't know, and then of course there are like localized weather phenomenon where people who live in valleys often experience completely different weather conditions than surrounding areas.
Well, and that's kind of where the Bloomington, um,
The city up on a hill.
but there's also a valley, in terms of like our weather patterns are slightly different than Indianapolis, even though it's only like 45 miles away.
Yeah,
And to the point that sometimes we'll be like 5 to 10 degrees warmer. Um, and I guess that's, it's easy to assume in the context of being within the same state that it's like, oh, they should have the same weather patterns, but it's like, well, look at California.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, sometimes Indianapolis is getting hammered by some crazy weather, and it's not happening in Bloomington at all, and vice versa. Sometimes we get a tornado and then nothing in Indianapolis. So weather is fickle.
Well, it's like I think our weather system is more related to like the Louisville weather system than the Indianapolis one, which
Yeah.
is weird in terms of like you wouldn't like we're closer to Indianapolis than Louisville, but the way our wind blows makes us more inclined to be in the Louisville weather uh, path, which is seems weird.
Yeah. Well, the Midwest is in a unique position because it gets hit from a lot of different weather patterns. I think that's another thing that's not regularly reflected upon. I mean, sometimes we hear like here when there's a big storm when it's storm season, it's like and a front is moving in from some place and colliding with the warm air from the Gulf. But when it's local weather, it doesn't feel like that. It's easy to forget that, oh yeah, there's this giant body of water south of us that has an incredible influence over our weather patterns, and depending on how dry it is in the Southwest and how much wind there is in Texas, or how much wind is coming down from Canada, or how much wind is coming at us from the East Coast.
Yeah, it's wild how much water we're surrounded by that's not ocean.
Yeah, and the Midwest is on path to becoming a deciduous rainforest here before 2070, when the South Coast is supposed to be consumed by inhospitable temperature and humidity.
Well, I'll just never forget that video of that house in Miami falling into the ocean.
Oh God.
It's like that just felt like a sign of the decades to come in terms of like all of the erosion and water damage and you know obviously just land movement that's going to happen in the next couple decades. It's like I I'm amazed that people still live in Florida. Like obviously you can't just have all the people in Florida move out at once, but like the people who continue to live there, I'm like, oh, are you just close enough to death where you're like, okay, fuck it, I'm just gonna ride
And
this out.
so the bedrock of Florida is limestone, which dissolves in water. Let's build all this stuff on sticks in sand and on rocks that dissolve in water. Ugh, God. I know why people move to Florida. It's beautiful. Whenever I look at images of Florida, it's like it looks like paradise, except for all of the buildings and all of the people on the beaches. And yeah, there are portions of it that look amazing, and there is incredible seafood if you're into seafood, and uh, all of the Caribbean culture and Gulf culture is accessible if you're into that stuff too, I guess. And so I can see why it's kind of it seems badass. Like it's like it's where you would go if Hawaii is too expensive or something. Because that's like real American paradise, right? Hawaii, or is Puerto Rico still like? Is that like more paradise? I mean, pre horrible hurricane, pre Puerto Rico, before the paper towel roll incident.
I mean, I guess theoretically, I'd never been there. I've
Yeah,
only seen. So that's where I'm like, I think for tourists,
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, oh, you mean people moving to Florida? Yeah, dude, I don't understand why anyone would want to live in a place like Florida. Too hot all year round.
yeah, and it says the lower third is supposed to be underwater by 2100 with current projections, which is like that's almost like if we live our normal lifespan, that's within our lifetime.
I mean, I don't think people are going to be able to inhabit Florida by that point. It's going to be too hot.
Yeah. I mean, just like Louisiana, though, in terms of like the Louisiana on the map we grew up with is not the same. It's not there anymore.
No, it's
So
shrinking.
much of it is underwater
They keep moving
that
levees back.
but they also aren't updating it on the map because they can't accept that this fucking shit is changing, which is
Yeah,
wild that we still have the Louisiana on the map that we grew up with instead of what is actually there. Americans and their inability to accept change is really like I think it's holding the entire world back to a degree, but it's like the self deception and delusion doesn't stop it. So I don't understand like how long this delusion is going to keep holding in terms of like you see these people on the East Coast during the storms and they're like, "Oh, we're just going to ride it out and we've been here before." No, you haven't been here before. This is completely new and these people are acting like because they've like survived storms before that they can survive this one or the next one and the one after that and it's like I just it's like obviously we have the QAnon stuff and then you have like cults and shit but there's like some weird delusion that Americans have in terms of like not being able to accept that weather patterns change period but also in terms of like them not being able to accept that it could possibly be getting worse and getting to a point where certain places are going to be uninhabitable like Death Valley, they don't call it fucking Life Valley, it's fucking Death Valley because nothing can fucking survive there in the worst times of the year. And that's where I'm like,
that's where significant portions of the southern United States are headed. Like uninhabitable.
yeah,
Like 90, I think it's like
exactly.
98
So
degrees average temperature, which is uninhabitable.
we don't have to have nuclear weapons drop to get that shit start spreading. So for them to like not understand that parts of the planet can become uninhabitable even though they were inhabitable before, it's like I don't it I, I can't fathom that mindset. There's something in terms of like the same way I can never imagine what it's like to be a murderer or some shit where you're like, oh, these people are able to think a certain way that other people, I won't call us regular, but we're not able to think like them for whatever reason, or not able. I won't say it that way. Our thought patterns don't occur in the same way as theirs, and there's something either wrong with them or right with us that allows us to not get stuck in those thought patterns, which is where I'm also like, where does it happen? Is it kindergarten? Is it fucking sixth grade? Is it like when they're 18? When do Americans decide they're no longer going to take in new information and they're going to stop learning things and they're going to stop accepting that the world that they grew up knowing could change? Because that's where I'm like, also,
I'm trying to
there's entire
project into
country.
this and I can't because I like to learn.
Well, there was like a speech at the wedding in terms of like, um, when somebody is born in a country that dissolves and no longer exists, those people are forced to deal with that type of change. Whereas like us
Yeah.
being born into United States of America that hasn't had a real Um, I guess
Reckoning.
since well, there's been the addition of Hawaii and in terms of like the most recent change in understanding of the country, it's like this is also why they don't want to accept Puerto Rico as a territory. It's because you have people. There's 50 states. There's 50 stars on the flag. That's it. You can't add. You can't take off. That's it. There's 50 states. Period. And to them, like the United States, even though it wasn't always 50 states, it's this static, unchanging concept of like 50 stars equals
63
50
years.
states.
It's been
Period.
63 years since we had gained the 50th star. Up until August 21, 1959, it was 49, and it wasn't. It wasn't. The flag wasn't. They didn't raise the the 50-star flag until July 4th, 1960. So it's only been 63 years. I guess 63 years is long enough for people to forget that there was once a time this the flag wasn't organized the way it is now. Oh wow. There's a whole culture of the internet that's trying to figure out how to add more stars to the flag. Oh no, I just found an infographic that shows the star count beginning in 1818 with 13 stars and 13 stripes, and then 1795 got 15, 1818 gets 20 stars, 1819 21, 1820 23, just keeps going on up. Alaska and was number 49, then Hawaii makes 50. The when I'm looking at the star count, it's so strange. It's like such a foreign organization of these stars to me, but I don't think it changes what the flag means.
But those, those are the people that are more concerned with like, oh, you can't let a flag ever touch the ground than like people in the military being horrible and like breaking laws and shit like that. They don't give a fuck if you're in the military and you're like an absolutely horrible person breaking fucking international, uh, you know, laws
Conventions.
against war. Yeah, but God forbid somebody let the fucking flag touch the ground. Those people lose their shit. Or if there's like a building burning down, save the flag first. Save the flag. Then you start looking for the women and children and the animals. Flag first.
Oh
Because this is
man.
where I'm like, you'll see those pictures ever so often of like, I'm not on Facebook, so I don't see them anymore, but it would be like, building burned down, but firefighter saves the flag. And they're like, you know, damn near about to start saluting or some shit, and the entire building's burnt down. And you're like, this is a fucking terrible event, but you're trying to like make it seem like salvaging this stupid fucking flag is something that was probably made in China at that is some big deal where it's like, yeah, I would be amazed if more than 10% of American flags were actually made in America.
Where are real flags made? Huh. RealAmericanFlag.com. That doesn't sound like an actual. That sounds like a company, not a. Let's see. Flag Manufacturers Association of America. 94% of American flags are made in the
I
United
don't buy that.
States.
I don't buy that for a goddamn
Yeah.
second. Not one fucking second. Nothing's 94% made in America in 2023. Not fucking flags, not cars, not fucking pencils. No goddamn way. Because then they'll be like, oh, there's like
Oh,
a
wait.
huge American production of.
In 2017, the U.S. imported 10 million American flags, with all but 50,000 coming from China.
Exactly. I don't buy that shit for a goddamn second. Fucking liars. That's what Americans produce lies. That's what we're good at producing.
94% of American flags are made in America. That means that 6% of them made in America flags are not made in America. Oh no, 100% of American flags are made in America 94% of the time. There's a way that this works.
Oh, okay. So something happened and it's important. So in like 2011, most of the flags were coming from China. And then some Senator Susan Collins and Sherrod Brown, I don't know how to say that, and Joe Manchin and Rick Scott introduced the All American Flag Act in 2017. Would require the government to buy only flags completely and produced and manufactured in the U.S.
Okay.
Do you know how bad the flag situation has to be for them to fucking introduce an act saying that the government has to buy flags from the United States? That means our government was buying so many fucking Chinese flags that Republicans and Democrats both agreed this has gone too far. We have too many Chinese American flags.
Chinese American flags.
So yeah, in 2017, only 50% of the American flags were American made materials. So yeah, you can't say, oh, it was assembled in America, but all the fucking materials came from China and say that's 100% made in America. That's exactly why you can't call a Ford car 100% American made, because a lot of the parts are coming from China. So like, I think in 23, the most a Ford can be built in America is like 75%, because if not all, many of their parts are coming from extranational sourcing. So this is the same thing with flags, where it's like, whatever material you're going to use to make it, if it's not coming from America, you can't call that shit 100% fucking American. So that's where, wow. The
Yep.
idea.
No such thing as a 100% US made car.
The way that our American flags used to be Chinese flags is like quintessentially capitalist America, in terms of like, yeah, produce it in the cheapest place, then stamp the fucking American branding on it. Yeah.
Even Teslas are partially made in not in America. The highest
in
percentage Tesla
2011,
is a 65% US content vehicle.
I mean, to be fair, that motherfucker's not American. He's South African, so
Yeah,
I don't
I'm pretty
expect,
sure that Teslas are registered in the United States.
right, but I don't expect an apartheid baby to be fucking concerned about the integrity of their product on
Oh,
any front.
of
So
course not. His cars
whether
fall apart. Oh,
yeah,
so
I
I
was
just
not.
learned something fucked up about Teslas and why it's very important to never, ever, like, find oneself in a Tesla product. So when they do actually make a really incredible electric motor system, and it has a lot of really unique technology into it, and they run really well. but they fail eventually. The coolant eventually leaks out of them because people drive too hard and they have cooling issues. They get old, they break. Shit happens. Well, when they manufacture them initially, they have this seal that apparently has 3 flanges inside of it to form a triple seal. And when these motor structures are rebuilt, and there's like a class action lawsuit mounting, they're being replaced with a single flange seal, which is guaranteed to fail, maybe twice as fast, maybe faster, because it just cannot seal adequately. This is like across the board. Refurbished, remanufactured Tesla motors are being rebuilt with substandard parts. That shit's fucked up. Like, the person who buys a GM product, they expect that engine to be able to be rebuilt to the same, to meet or exceed OEM's specifications. Same thing with a Ford or a Dodge, or trying to think of a Japanese manufacturer with engine problems, but Mitsubishi. Well, people don't buy Mitsubishis for their engines. They buy them because they're affordable. People, same thing. Hyundai and Kia, they flat out replace their engines when they break, and they just give people new engines. Like, what the fuck? Teslas are insanely expensive vehicles. They can't bother to remanufacture their engines to meet their original state.
Oh,
That's like the most like reprehensible vehicle manufacturing practice right there. And because nobody else can remanufacture their engines but Tesla, that's even worse. Nobody else can do it, and then they're going to turn out a substandard product so people have to buy a brand new engine or motor. They just might as well buy a whole new car.
I mean, that's what it comes down to in terms of like Tesla's aftermarket value is just terrible. It's great for the first couple years, but once it hits the point where the actual parts within the car start to break down, it's like you have a fucking gigantic paperweight.
Oh man,
and it's a explosive paperweight at that. and I think in terms of like, Tesla's not the only one this is happening to, but before Tesla's, it was not a thing for cars to just be like sitting and then catch on fire and explode. I think the only Fiskars were electric. I mean, I guess they still are probably if they still exist, but I know there was like a flood that happened and a bunch of Fiskars fucking exploded because you can't get the batteries wet, and flooding is just gonna make it so that it's impossible for batteries not to get wet. But it's like, that was an isolated incident, but that was all I've ever heard of like Fiskars exploding. Whereas like Teslas, it's a joke now in terms of like, I've never ridden in a Tesla. I've sat in one. I've never actually been in one while it's on the road. I don't want to.
It's like a really fast golf cart.
Well, I mean, I'm sure in terms of like electric cars, there's so many things that are going to be common that they're going to have in common with the golf cart. It's
like being in a Mercedes, not a Mercedes. It's like being in a high-end Toyota or a entry-level Lexus, but not as nice as either. But it wants to be.
And, I've sat in one. I've gone to the Tesla.
They accelerate like golf carts.
That's my experience. To the Tesla dealership in Indiana, in the fashion mall, and sat in a bunch of different ones. In terms of like, it just felt like, oh, you're paying for this fucking tablet in the middle, and everything else is like, sub Mercedes quality in terms of like.
It reminded me of the way that I feel when I look at concept cars, but it didn't feel like, I don't know. My experience was very limited. And
Well,
so,
even then, it doesn't feel like concept cars in terms of like,
no, it feels like a
I don't
cheap
know how many
concept car.
car shows you've
It
gone
feels like
to.
a bad drawing of like a hand drawing of a concept car.
Because whenever I've seen concept cars in real life, it's like, oh, the line model never looks like the fucking concept, but the concept is just so um detailed on every little thing where it's like one sticks out in my head, the Ford Triton fucking truck, where I'm like, I saw the concept truck for that, and the actual road truck is just nothing like the fucking concept in terms of like,
I mean,
they'll always
I'm
put the
thinking more in
highest
terms of
end.
like the way that the dash looks because it doesn't look natural to
Right.
me.
But I'm saying in terms of like
But the
they'll
fit and
always put
finish
the
is crap.
highest end, it's always going to be the highest end model for the concept. So it's like if there's three levels of uh standard with a model, they're going to put the fourth level that you never can actually purchase on the concept car because the three
Yeah.
that are
No, no, no.
able to be
I think you're
produced.
thinking of the nice version of when I say concept car. When I say concept
I'm
car,
talking
I mean
about
like
the actual
no, I
like
know, no, I know.
it's like
Like when
the
I was
prototype.
inside when I got to sit inside a Tesla, I felt like I was inside of a drawing of what someone thinks a car from the future would look like, but somebody who doesn't actually spend a lot of time in cars. It felt like they were designing a cockpit to appeal to somebody who's not driving. It didn't feel like it was created for me. Like I'm definitely not the audience that they were designing that interior for. It felt like almost like a drawing of a living room. It didn't
Right.
seem
I mean, and it
it was
felt like
it was
somebody
wrong.
who designed it has never been in a car, and that's where you like the shit like the yoke for the wheel or instead of a steering wheel. It's like, yeah, yokes look cool if you're like 12, but it's like, oh, try to execute a turn. Like it's the things that they were doing with the design. It was like, oh, a 12-year-old was like, oh, this looks cool. Let me do this instead of like thinking like an actual person who's going to be using that thing uh daily, let alone at all. Um, and that's where again, that's not how concept cars are delivered. If anything, concept cars are like over uh the
I mean,
the
concepts
options.
can be deeply flawed too. I think that's
Oh,
what we
for
got with
sure, but
Tesla.
they're not gonna be like under detailed with a concept car when they're like putting it out for people to see. Oh, did you see the Flash?
Yeah.
So that Mercedes that Bruce Wayne is driving in that film is a concept
Oh
car
yeah.
from Mercedes in terms of like they may never ever bring it to production, but that one is like decked out in a way that if you got inside of the actual vehicle that they used in the film, it's gonna be as if it was built for somebody like Bruce Wayne who has a bunch of different things that they need to do in a fucking car instead of the Tesla where it's just like, oh, you got a big fucking tablet in the middle and that's basically it.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
that's where it's
I think
like,
that's why it's a deeply flawed concept. Let's build a car around a tablet. The tablet's the future, guys. We can do everything with this thing. We can control a spaceship with a tablet.
because even then, have you seen any Tesla semis on the road yet?
No. Wait, Pepsi bought a bunch of them and they're all localized in one city. Where's Pepsi's?
Mm.
Let's see. This PepsiCo Tesla semi fleet. They only go out of. They only do a 100-mile range. Come on, tell me where you're operating out of. North American. Oh, Sacramento. We got to go to Sacramento if we want to see some Tesla semi trucks. Who has Tesla semi trucks? Man, that's also a fucked up concept vehicle.
Yeah,
Who
the
has
interior of those just look insane. It like the
Walmart in Arizona? No, Walmart has some. Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch has ordered them, but they don't have any. Cisco has reserved 50, but they don't have any. UPS has uh, ordered 125, but they haven't. They've only reserved them. DHL has 10 on reserve. Meyer has ordered for. Ryder has reserved an unspecified number. So it looks like they're all on order. Pepsi is the only company that's received any of them. Nobody has them, just Pepsi. Pepsi is going to be the only company that has Tesla's semi trucks, and nobody else is going to order them because obvious reasons, infrastructure. Also, the seat from the cockpit photo looks like the kind of place where I don't know. It looks more like a video game than it does a vehicle.
well to put the steering wheel in the very middle of the cockpit is like this is not a McLaren. You're not this is not an F1 vehicle. Like
My understanding
I
is it
can't
kills visibility at the sides.
yeah.
Like the
I can only
apparently the mirrors are
imagine
useless.
going from like driving a standard way for, your entire life and then moving the seat is gonna cause problems. Like I imagine it's totally not necessarily like a huge problem, but it's definitely gonna be like, oh, they're gonna have to get used to looking in a different part of the mirror, or, how they check their mirrors or things like that. Where it's like, if you didn't start driving on a Tesla semi, of course, again, it's possible to transition, but you're gonna have to learn some differences in the way you like drive the vehicle because that's where it feels like all the decisions they're making about their vehicles don't think about other vehicles, which is like that's fine to make it your brand, but then it's going to make it really difficult for people to switch between other vehicles and yours. And that's where, I if I'm a truck driver and I'm looking at, oh, this Tesla semi, I'm gonna have to find special charging stations. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find charging stations. I don't know how long it's gonna take to charge. It's just not gonna seem like a smart transition.
So back
And it's
in June 17th of this year, Road and Track published that Tesla has produced 36 semi trucks, and they've all been delivered to Pepsi. Pepsi has 21 of them in Sacramento, and the rest of them are in Modesto. Oh man, when is it? When do people decide that he's just taking their money and running with it and spending it on other shit? That it's clearly a scam.
I don't know. Maybe they'll figure it out with the Cybertruck because those don't look like they're getting delivered
Think he'll
as promised or anytime soon.
I watched a video of some tests of various features of the Cybertruck, and the one that stood out to me the most was that terrible single windshield wiper solution that Lord Muskie wants. It was like they put it in a wind tunnel, and at a certain speed, it can't even function. Just goes straight up the windshield because it's a flat windshield, and just air just goes right over it like this, just like a ramp. It's just ready. Doesn't go around. It goes up and over. Just holds the fucking windshield wiper blade in one place.
Wow.
Also, I read that apparently during early tests of the self-driving software, he was using it illegally on roads in California, and the thing tried to kill him several times. Just apparently tried to drive off the road around bends. That wasn't reported early on. I think if people knew that his own self-driving system tried to kill him multiple times, like in the system's infancy, then there would have been a lot more oversight from, government regulatory bodies. They'd be like, hey, man, if this thing's actually trying to kill you, you need to tell us. He has so much money, he could just buy a test track. He could build a giant ass road out in the middle of nowhere to test everything on. Doesn't need to have other people on the road. Doesn't need to drive this thing around public roads. And he tried to build that tube system, which failed.
Yeah, we're not hearing much about that lately, huh?
Yeah,
They're not hailing the
hypertube.
Hyperloop. Hyperloop is like the next big thing.
Yeah, I think people. There had to have been some like timely resurgence of Futurama where everyone watched people getting shoved around in tubes, and they realized, wait, this is a terrible idea. Futurama has been lambasting this kind of travel for years. We're not going back to like the tube mail system of of bygone era. Getting shot around in a plug. Getting smashed into by a plug because the plug you're in started slowing down unexpectedly because one of its air bearings failed. Sometimes I feel like I feel like that he gets his ideas from like science fiction novels, but he gets the idea before he finishes the science fiction novel, where they conclude that whatever idea it was a terrible idea. Like, I hope he never reads A Brave New World.
So it's been over 10 years since he started talking about the Hyperloop, which is wild in terms of like, that's a long time for this concept to have been in the public zeitgeist, not produce anything, and then kind of fade away in terms of like, this is a massive failure, a massive inflation of what was possible based on lack of understanding of what was actually possible. And to be fair, I do think Elon Musk praise is like not as prevalent in the media anymore, but they should also be attacking this dude for the ridiculous stuff that he used to say that has failed massively, or like the contradictions in running an electric car company and then creating rockets that produce massive amounts of carbon fucking waste.
But they're reusable. You know what happens to all of those old carcasses of rockets that land in the ocean that aren't completely recovered? Most of them contribute to reef development. Same thing with old oil derricks and sunken ships. A lot of those things turn into reefs. They're made out of materials that don't like deteriorate quickly.
By still using
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying that's like a happy byproduct.
No, but by still like saying, oh, we can have reusable rockets, well, then we never move on from rockets at all.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's not to say that we should be using balloons or like a space elevator or some shit like that. It's a matter of like, well, if we say, oh, we're just gonna stay and perfect this one technology, then we never move past it.
Yeah, we never get like magnetic propulsion.
Yeah, like the rail. What's it?
I'm just thinking of like harnessing the magnetic flux of our planet to lift objects into space.
Have you seen spin launch?
That thing is so cool.
Yeah, so that's what I'm like again.
But the math behind it's insane.
Is way cooler than a fucking rocket. So like the idea that spin launch,
you just flinging shit,
reusable too.
Yep.
So You know,
And it turns out it's way less complicated to pack a container to withstand like the sudden release of energy than it is to pack a container to withstand the sustained release of energy. Like one of them is just letting go, and the other one is like pushing really
yeah,
fucking hard. And
yeah,
my understanding of the spin launch thing is that the most complicated part is actually the math of when to let it go so that it exits
yep.
the revolution chamber at the right time and doesn't, blow the whole thing up. And that's actually not that complicated in terms of doing that. It's actually apparently easier than launching a rocket.
I mean, they've done it.
Yeah, I know. Like, it's like totally like a David versus Goliath type thing. He's like just slingshot this thing into space.
Well, and I don't think they've hit orbit yet with the fucking spin launch, but they've definitely tested it enough to prove that it's like a viable concept.
Yeah.
So that's where, to me, spin launch is like way more exciting of a prospect in terms of like, hopefully there'd be something after that too. But that's where I'm like, oh, this is way more sustainable and less environmentally destructive than fucking internal combustion, I guess external combustion rockets. Cause that's where it's like, putting all that shit back into our atmosphere just to get out of the atmosphere. It's like, it feels self-defeating in terms of like, yeah, we got out into space, but made climate change 1,000 times worse because the exhaust from all the fucking rockets just choked out the atmosphere. And it's like, well, this can't is not to say that the rockets are going to be what causes humans to be doomed from climate change, but it's like making them more frequent is definitely not going to help. And that's where the reusable rockets, in terms of like still being horrible polluters, while also making it seemingly easier to launch rockets, is like, that's actually, it feels like a step backwards when we have to worry about the climate.
Okay, so they've done 10 successful suborbital launches, and they're scheduled their first orbital launch attempt for 2026. Looks like every time they fire one of these things off, it gets a little bit higher every time. So they're moving slowly and safely. Looks like they're being cautious. 10
Whereas,
dozen.
yeah, SpaceX is like, hey, let's shoot for the moon. And then they blow up off the platform and they're like, actually, that was a great success because we were really only checking to see if the launch pad
We
worked.
wanted to make sure if we needed a deluge system or not. It's okay, we have a deluge system on order. Because they installed one right away after they ripped up their launch pad. Idiots. Hey, not everyone can operate a space program like China, where they literally just throw rocks into space and see which version of their system works. Not every country has that kind of population where they have like statistically more astronauts. Well, that qualify, I guess, is what are the taikonauts? Not every country has 1.4 billion people to draw talent from, and or 1.4 billion people that are, they can get a group of who are willing to get into a tin can and see if they can how long they can survive low orbit radiation exposure. But the Chinese are also going to build a kilometer long low orbit platform apparently. So who knows? Maybe their method of just throwing everything they can at it might somehow work. And I mean, like their space station that they threw up there right after they got kicked out, they lost access to the ISS. That thing's actually pretty nice looking and nice looking. Well, we don't know how long it's going to stay up there. And apparently China's economy is like in free fall. So they might not be able to sustain that mission at all.
Well, it also seems like that's where they're putting a lot of their resources. So it's like if they're able to sustain anything, it's going to be these things for, the next 10 years or whatever. But I wonder how much Russia's uh, space prowess has been overstated based on
Completely overstated.
what they did at first.
They couldn't even knock off the shuttle. Their space shuttle Buran's rotting in a warehouse somewhere in the middle of Russia. They were only successful at building rockets and little capsules. Their space station technology is based off of old capsules that they don't want to bring back into the atmosphere because they'll be destroyed by reentry. It's like the old our space program's docking system has to be like compatible with theirs, and because of that, that's like one of the failure points. It's bad. Their space program is shit. It's like it peaked in the '60s, and they've been relying on now 40 something year old technology this whole time. At least China's space program is probably based off of like '80s technology that they ripped off from the United States, which is still better than '60s Russian ripped off from America technology. We know that the mythology of their of Russian fighter pilots was a joke. We know that their planes just get shot down like left and right, or they don't even get off the ground. Ukraine, man, they're on like their 10th or 11th generation of drone now. They've got like boat drones and like submersible drones and aircraft that can fly in and take out entire airstrips. And the submersible drones is the one that really blows my mind because those things just like hang out and just in sleep mode until something gets close and like, oh yeah, let's go drive into that thing. Boom. I don't think Russia. I think Russia is like, at best, a really advanced World War II technology level country at this point. And they have some really sophisticated, their hypersonic missiles, and they have some really nasty ICBMs. But all that stuff's like, that stuff's really old.
Right? And how much of it was myth in the first place in
Yeah.
terms of like,
How much of it was just lying about how much they
yeah,
actually had?
supposedly they had the rods from God or whatever. I'm like, I don't buy that shit now at
No, they
all.
never would have been able to get those
Motherfuckers
things to
can't
space.
maintain tanks. Nah,
Do they even
nah.
have tungsten? China is the
Yeah.
world's largest producer of tungsten. They produce 85% of it. Russia is they're number three by production, but they only produce 2.3 metric 2,300 metric tons. China produces 71,000 metric tons. What the?
So there's apparently a Chinese study saying that the rods from God wouldn't even actually be that destructive, which makes it seem like, yeah, these things were never real. And it was just like hyperbole in terms of like, oh, yeah, we got these fucking tungsten rods up in orbit. Yeah, you don't want to fuck with us. This is like the Cold War exaggeration where
And then the Chinese are like, guys, if you just want to drop rocks from space, that's fine, but don't waste this metal. This metal's actually difficult to extract, and it's useful for a lot of things. Let's be reasonable here. I mean, each one of those tungsten rods would probably, accelerate the climate crisis by an extra year. It's like, oh, each one of those, that's like 1 year. Everything happens sooner. Get 15 of those things in space, we just shaved 15 years off of how much time we have left. Assholes.
Which then, I know there's urban myth and there's lore, and then there's uh the public zeitgeist in terms of like what people think exists and what people think is possible. Even down to like something like Skynet, in terms of people talk about Skynet as if it's possible because that's probably the only frame of reference they have for some sort of like massive malevolent artificial intelligence. um but even then there's so much extrapolation in terms of scientific progress that has to happen to get to even the possibility of Skynet. It's like there has to be auto generated script that functions with intention that is not induced by someone else. And that's so far out where I'm like, you can't just skip straight to Skynet. There's like so many steps, and even in the film, it kind of skipped. Like they were like mass surveillance. Now it knows everything and it has intention and it's going to destroy. And it's like there's still going from like sentience to intention is a huge fucking step. And it wasn't. I don't even think it was necessarily sentient so much as reactive in the way that they're showing it. So something that's reactive and has a set of rules that are automated and creates the objective that's lethal. Yeah, that's one thing. But giving something intention and also making it single-minded with its intention, as if that intention can't be changed due to outside influence, well, that's still not sentience then. That's just an automated script. So there's a lot of things about science fiction and the way that the threats are presented that in reality, obviously it's fiction. So to us, it's like, oh, we're not concerned with Skynet because we know it's fiction. But then there's these people who know who've seen Terminator and know AI exists, but don't know enough about either one to make the connection that this science fiction story is meant to be an allegory to show humans shouldn't let technology run unfettered. Like, you shouldn't get to a point where you just let the tech do its own thing, and that's like what the point of the story is. Not that Skynet's going to be real.
Yeah, a hammer doesn't need to be able to think for itself. Sometimes we just need tools to do what tools do. I don't want my dishwasher telling me like, "Hey, you should clean your dishes," or my fridge telling me that I need to buy milk. Some things are actually solutions for problems that don't exist. I think a lot of smart technology is like that, actually. Well, I guess the problem of people not remembering to turn their oven off is still a real thing.
Well, but you don't need a computer for your car to tell you when your oil's low,
That's
or
true.
when your coolant's low, or when anything's low. It's like sensors and reactivity are good enough. Like, sentience and smart objects are, it seems like something that would be useful, but it's actually unnecessary in like most, if not all cases. Like, and I'll point out like a good example in terms of like a vending machine. A vending machine is reactive. Like, we don't need to make that vending machine smart. We don't need it to make it interactive. We don't need it to be able to like adjust its coding. It just needs to say, If you push this button with the proper money in, and the thing can count the money, you get the soda or you get whatever, the chips or the candy bar. So adding anything on top of that runs the risk of that having a breakdown, but further, it's completely unnecessary. So there's all these things in terms of like you're saying, a refrigerator doesn't need to know when you're out of milk. So that element of adding intelligence to it seems like, oh, it's a possibility, but is it a necessity? And it's definitely not a necessity. So when we're adding all these unnecessary things, we're making life unnecessarily complex in ways that the individual producers don't care about cumulatively because they're so focused on the individual item. Back to Tesla.
You mentioned like productivity and or complexity, and I read recently about how um, people often confuse being busy with being productive, and how like complexity itself is often a reflection of being busy because you got a lot of shit going on. People got a lot of things on their plate at any given moment nowadays, and in so many ways, I've observed when people try to multitask, most of the time they fail to accomplish their goals. In fact, most of the time they fail to accomplish any of the goals. It's only once like one task is focused on that things actually begin to thrive. And it's really kind of maddening to me because I've always tried to tap into my apparently my superpowers, like hyper focusing, and I try to get in on that because if I start focusing on something, then I accomplish cool things. Interesting things begin to happen, and it always maddens me when it's like, oh, let's throw this in there, let's do this more, add more things to this, when none of those things are actually necessary to accomplish a goal. And on some level, like a computer they're so powerful, they can do so many things and keep track of all this stuff, and it's really tempting to make them do a lot of things all at once. But in my experience, when we make them focus on one thing, then they start to reveal like just how capable they really are. Because when we're doing a bunch of random crap, and is anyone really doing anything important when they're doing like 20 things?
No, definitely not. Unless they're a pilot.
Yeah, well, pilots are like
That's about the only person.
that's like the only person that's allowed to do 20 things at one time, but they're also licensed. I'd be so mad if we had to get licenses to operate computers like for personal utilization. But maybe that's what's necessary.
Well, I know we grew up with multitasking emerging, but I have come to the conclusion that it like just doesn't really exist. It's just like serialization in rapid sequence. And it may look like multitasking, but it's just rapid serialization.
And you never have, and one never gives himself enough time to really get into an activity because if they did, they would ignore everything else. I mean, how many people? I don't know very many people who can just read like one page of a book at a time and feel satisfied reading a book. Like when I want to read a book, I'm like actually genuinely interested in reading and consuming the contents of these pages.
Take another one.
You sit there and you immerse yourself. You can't. No one can just one page. Oh yeah, that's all the information I need for right now. I can't even say it with a straight face. Because it's so absurd to think that, like, oh yeah, all of the information that one could possibly need in this moment could be contained on one page. not even an infographic can pull that off. And an infographic is a good one. Those things are like the equivalent of several pages, if not several posters. And by poster, I mean like a window-sized object, a TV screen-sized object in portrait mode. That's what I think of when I think of a poster. Like several of those. A good infographic is several posters, not one piece of paper in a book. Even the most dense technical literature requires several pages to explain, simple concepts, because they have to make sure that people understand. There's no, I just don't understand like the culture that pretends to multitask. I guess it seems disingenuous.
I mean, I think in a sense, I think they did it to feel less inadequate compared to other people they thought were doing it and pulling it off. At least that's what my inferences of it.
Yeah.
But it definitely, like, I've never really met anybody that's multitasking well in terms of like actually doing two things at once.
Musicians, they're like playing an instrument and communicating with each other at the same time.
But that's still rapid serialization, and it's not even really multitasking.
Maybe it's like
in terms of,
syncopation.
like,
It's like syncopation. They're like playing a different, like they're using a different limb to actuate a different portion of the instrument at that moment.
It's also inference and intuition.
Yeah.
In terms of like, you can't know if the person's gonna hit the next note at the exact same time as you. You can assume and continue on your trajectory with the understanding that they're going to be in time with you, and assuming that the drummer is the one keeping time. But until it happens, you can't know until it happens. And then when it happens, you're already moving on to the next note, which is why it's actually a whole lot of intuitive inference, that the best ones make it seem like
yeah, it's an illusion. It's an illusion. It's definitely
is,
illusion, because it's a lot of things that are happening together that form the actual performance itself of the instrument. These things are all intertwined. They can't be separated from each other. I was just trying to think, like, is there anything that actually that there really isn't? Because even a pilot who's monitoring 20 different things at once, those things all happen for them to operate that plane or ship or whatever properly. That they all have to happen. It's not like they can choose to ignore any of those dials, or it's not like a musician can choose to ignore the energy in a room. That's part of playing the instrument. Or the electronic musician there are feeling the energy in the room, so they know how much to turn that dial. There's a lot going on, but it's all one thing. I think multitasking at that level would be like also chopping up vegetables and preparing a stew while DJing for a crowd. But that's impossible. You need like 2 extra arms and hands.
Right, and even then, if you don't have those extra arms, it's just rapid serialization.
Yeah,
yet again.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's like, ultimately, because we are limited to 2 hands.
God, that's such a novelty act. Like somebody sitting on a stool and like chopping vegetables with their hands while DJing with their feet.
Well, there's like people. I've seen people who can like draw with their hands and their feet different pictures at the same time, where it's like, it's even then it's still rapid serialization, because they're like executing one stroke with like the intention of one stroke and then the intention of the next one. Whereas like, if they were executing these starts of each stroke at the same time, then they'd have to be able to look in 2 different directions with their eyes at the same time, which is not possible. So it's like, or it's not possible to look in 2 different directions and perceive both things equally at the same time. like magic eye. If you focus on what's in the back, you miss the foreground in terms of like the whole point of the magic eye is you can't see all of the layers at the same time, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
important. It's necessary to switch layers of your focus to see the message or whatever is hidden in the image, but also that necessitates not being able to perceive all of it at the same time. So that's why again, like, um, you can like put certain parts of your mind or body on autopilot and then start focusing on other things, but that necessitates less focus on the things that are on autopilot, like inherently, which means you can't have equal focus on all things in terms of like whatever's on autopilot clearly has less focus than the main focal point. And I think a person who heavily believes in multitasking is going to argue with me on that in terms of like they would think that they can focus on all things equally,
Oh no,
but
man.
a simple test is going to prove that wrong.
I bet it takes something like half of all available cognitive ability to balance two different tasks in a serial handoff and do it fast enough that it seems fluid. I bet it takes more than that. I bet it takes like 60, maybe 70, 80% of pure cognitive capability to balance tasks. And at that point, you're left with maybe what 10% brain power to manage the thing that you're actually doing. I don't think it's possible. I think things like driving require a significant amount of attention to do safely. I think things like operating a kitchen knife next to one's hands requires full attention. Um, Cooking anything with oil at high temperatures requires full attention. Like there's some things that like just can't be done while other things are being done. Even typing, you know, if someone's actually typing and really entering a lot of keystrokes, they're really focused. There's no watching a TV show and maintaining a side conversation in a text message and checking email and having Facebook up on a tablet and retweeting some bullshit that no one's gonna see or care about. Like none of that shit happens when someone's actually doing something. And so it's just it's like a trick to appear busy. It's a nearly chaotic environment, a composed chaos that appears busy and appears like there's some level of productivity happening because it mimics somebody who's actually in a heightened state of productivity. It has the same kind of cerebral satisfaction of engaging at that high level. But it can't possibly be anywhere as productive unless the goal is to be leisurely entertained and
No, so I think you might be nailing onto something in terms of like in our mortality, we want to experience as much as possible. So when somebody is telling themselves they're multitasking, they're basically like doubling up on a minute of activity. So it's like if they're doing two things in 1 minute, they're actually living 2 minutes worth of life in 1 minute. But they're not experiencing either one accurately. So it's like 50% of the experience of both. So it really is still just a minute of bad experience. So I think
wait, 50% of a minute is still 30 seconds, so they still only got
right, of course, because they're switching back and forth and they're not actually experiencing either one for the full minute, but in their limited perception, because it's happening overlapping, they're tricking themselves into thinking that they're getting 100% of both experiences and then thinking like, oh yeah, I just like did 2 minutes worth of life in 1 minute. Like it feels like, to me, I think that's what
Man, you just described
Must be their
a
impetus.
really a potentially dark sci-fi and humorous dark sci-fi by that about people who like experience life at accelerated rates and it's part of their social score and some people are, you know, extra experienced for their chronological age. But nobody's actually done anything. They've just sat in front of like 20 monitors and had a bunch of different audio feeds and just are bombarded with information but never do
Well, on
anything.
that note, do you remember right around the time that multitasking became big, they were trying to push speed reading?
Oh, that joke of a scanning process.
Yeah, yeah. And people were trying to act like they could really speed read whole fucking entire books in like 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
that
it's
was
like,
such bullshit.
oh yeah, complete bullshit. But it was happening around the same time in terms of like there is a wall in which my thoughts or anybody's thoughts for that matter are inaccessible. So if I say, "Oh, I just speed read that book," you can't know for sure until you quiz me on it. So like these people who were saying this shit were just able to get away with passing the quizzes for enough of time where people thought speed reading was real or whatever, and then that's where like there was a good couple of years where they were, selling those speed reading seminars and speed reading books, learn how to speed read, but it's going to take you a long time to read the book.
I wonder if any
And
of those people
fucking,
actually had to write some kind of, you know, dissertation that was essentially just pure literary analysis or criticism and had to prove that they read it. Because I don't think that speed reading would could pass like the academic litmus test. I
well,
just
it's wild. Like when you write something, that doesn't mean you even remember what you wrote. Because I'll go back and read stuff that I wrote, and it's like the first time I've read it. It might as well be in terms of like not remembering it, let
oh
alone
no, I know, but like
remembering writing it.
but when when you have to demonstrate that you've actually gone through material, it's different than someone in a you know a student in a classroom is like, oh yeah, watch this, blah blah blah. I can just wave my finger at paper. That stuff was always so like
Well, that
mind-boggling
shit.
too.
Well, that would always piss me off during school when they would ask those kinds of questions. It would be like
Who can
on
scan the
page
fastest?
68, the character Rosa Lynn gave something to the dog. What was it? And I'm like, I don't fucking remember what happened on page 68. But if they would have just asked, like, what did Rosa Lynn give the dog? Like, it wouldn't fuck with me in terms of that framing would always throw me off in school. And that's where I think a lot of people got hung up on like number of pages in a book and like the length of a book making it more complex. And so it was like, oh, if you read a long book that made you a reading authority, like, oh, you read a fucking Stephen King 300-page book, you're a reader. So
Yeah, but that's not dense
people would
literature.
like, well, but it's also like a lot of it is linguistically not very complex.
Yeah.
So like reading a 300-page book that's like the skill reading level of like an eighth grader is not significantly better than reading a 40-page book that's at the skill level of a doctor. So that to me, I think was like length got conflated with complexity or difficulty for that matter. And that's where like you'd end up reading something that's like extremely complex. For example, uh, the Communist Manifesto. It's like very few people have actually gone through and read it because it's not that long, but it's so dense and it's so complex that it's like it's like really difficult to get through that fucking little bit of material, but it's just so dense that you're like, okay, you got to pause and fucking think about it if you're really taking it in. And that to me is like, so I can read something, but I don't necessarily take it in. And that's where, to me, a lot of the speed reading, quote unquote, is just like, oh, yeah, my eyes went over the word. My eyes like ran over the information, but did I take in the information? No. And some of the people would fake it enough to make it seem like they took in the information. But there's like a famous meme of like a dude supposedly like a Nigerian dude speed reading for like Nigeria's Got Talent, whatever. Then they asked him about it, and he can't answer a fucking question because he didn't actually read it. And that's where, of course, like most of the speed readers are that Nigerian dude. He just got caught.
Several months ago, I found this website that has all these, I guess they're previous edition PDFs of PDF of previous editions of academic literature. Like, here's one: doctoral thesis about the acoustics and psychoacoustics of a classical guitar. Building acoustics, architectural acoustics, architectural acoustics 2, architectural acoustics applications of modern acoustics, acoustics and psychoacoustics, acoustic fields and psychoacoustics. Like, some of this stuff is getting into a point where I would actually have to start reading a bunch of supporting material for this stuff to make sense. I've scanned through a bunch of it, and that's how I know it's like, oh yeah, this is like stuff that I'm definitely interested in, but not quite ready for. Like, I need to understand more about how a building is constructed before I start looking at these advanced variations on the theme or different principles to apply when constructing things. Because I am not ready, and I can recognize that. But this information is out there, and it like feeds my desire to understand more. Kind of,
Well, but then
kind of
you
to your
also,
point about people who give up on learning. Like, do you think it's
but
is it that there are I guess paths that are like essentially dead ends for information?
I mean, in people, yes, for sure. But I think part of it, Rec, is self awareness in terms of like you enjoy learning about building and construction and building materials, but you didn't build your fucking garage
Hell no. I'm not gonna, like, there's a lot of things
because
that
you're
I don't want
not.
to
You
do.
know you're not good enough.
Yeah.
You know you don't know enough. You know you'd fuck up something that in the long run you could make it cheaper. You could do it on your own, but there's going to be something that you don't know about the process that those people knew as to why you hired them instead of trying to do that fucking shit
Oh
yourself.
yeah.
So there's a self-awareness that comes with understanding one's own capability, understanding the peak of that capability, and understanding where you fall relative to the peak. And that's where there's some uh
Like, seriously, some of this
honest
stuff
honest
actually has like
self-assessment.
some of this stuff has like 400 like level course stamp on it, basically. Like 400 and 500
For
level
sure.
course literature. It's like,
Well,
it's
on
really
that note,
crazy stuff. It's like, holy shit,
but
this is.
but at the same time, it's like, okay,
I know that there's a lot of
you could
reading
have
that you done to
the,
actually get it.
there's the tools, you could have rented the same tools, you could have had the same amount of time, but because the people that did that have the experience and the knowledge, they were able to do in
12
what amount of
hours.
time, yeah, whatever they took. If you would have taken that same time, not only would you have not been able to do that thing that they did, but it probably would have ended up fucking something up, and then you have to call somebody like them to come and fix it anyway.
Hmm.
So to me, that is a perfect example of where people who are aware of themselves learn things, but also know when they don't know enough about something, when something needs to be done to pass the ball to somebody else. And that's where that doesn't stop you from learning more about construction and engineering.
Oh hell no.
But at that point, you're like, okay, this project, I'm going to pass it to somebody else and continue learning about this subject instead of like taking this opportunity to try to flex the little knowledge I have and see if I can
Wing it.
fucking wing it and work my way through it. And like,
Oh man.
when the problems arise, I'll fucking YouTube it. I'll YouTube University that shit because what that other person's smarter than me. That this guy that builds garages, is he smarter than me? Well, maybe not, but he fucking knows this thing
Oh
very
man.
specifically.
Those guys already have like
hard.
they already have tens of thousands of dollars worth of necessary tools and hardware.
Well, and the hours
The
and the hours
hours.
of the times where they fucked up and fixed it that you haven't put in yet,
Oh yeah.
where you recognize that and then you hire them. Whereas some people are gonna go ahead and try to fucking do that shit themselves. And I feel like those people are probably the ones that didn't do well in school either. And it's like there is an element of even when you enjoy learning about something, like knowing that you are not good enough at that thing yet to engage with it, to then be like, okay, um like I just changed the air filter in the car, and it's like I'm not, that doesn't make me a fucking mechanic. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like
dude, just because
just
I
working on a
perform
car does not make you a mechanic. Whereas
seriously.
people will think that, oh, I can go change the oil in my car. I can fucking change the brake fluid. And then they got air in their brake line and their shit ain't working right suddenly.
Oh yeah, no. Just because I am thoroughly capable of maintaining my 20 almost 29-year-old truck doesn't mean I'm a mechanic. It just means I know how to keep that thing running. That's it. I'm not a shop. I don't want to fix other people's cars. I have no problem maintaining my vehicles because I expect to utilize them until I can no longer maintain them. But to within reason, I'm not going to be doing crazy shit like changing. I'm not going to pull my own engine out. I'm not going to buy that kind of hardware. I don't think. Actually, I might because I'm trying to build a Chevy Fleetline, so I might have to have an engine stand. Might have to figure out some kind of hoist situation. But I'll just sell that stuff after the thing's built. Treat it like a rental fee, and then put it on Facebook Marketplace, and somebody will buy it because they'll want that stuff. Somebody out there won't care that somebody else has used it for one project. But I'm also not trying to tool up and become a shop. Like I have every intention of, if I don't actually need it for just general maintenance, then I don't need that. There are some specialized tools that make life easier, like that are like very specific to my truck, that I don't have a reason to own otherwise. And if I didn't have that vehicle, I would probably not have those tools. But maybe I'm also not trying to collect a bunch of tools.
Well, you need
I
a
want it.
place,
Yeah,
you
well,
know.
I want just enough to do the things that I need to do, and because there is definitely like a certain point where it's like I'm not really trying to mess with fucking a transmission or really take apart an engine. I'm not really trying to get to that level of 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 the hobby. Like building cars is cool. That's fun. But like the part where it goes beyond, like having a reliable vehicle where it requires like really specialized parts, or like if it's not built if it's built for something other than pure reliability, like some people are trying to are they get bit by the performance bug, and so there's no amount of power that satisfies like the, you know, add more power at any point possible, bigger heads, more airflow, supercharger, nitrous, hell, let's get a big block and do all the same things. You know, and I watch these videos where people are just driving their giant ass engine vehicles like crazy people, and they get ended up like in a accident, or they get into a was a pit situation with a state trooper where they get spun around the interstate, and then there's an accident and traffic is diverted around and it delays people's lives. Like none of the, I mean, oh man, none of that seems, all of that stuff seems absurd to me. But I still want to build a cool car. But I don't know. On some level, it seems like the culture itself that does it is obviously very divided, because there's some people who want to build like essentially street legal race cars.
Yeah, that seems to be a significant enough portion of it that it's like I feel like they are not completely representative of it, but enough of it that they give it a kind of a bad name, which is where other people could probably go far in helping that reputation by not being like street racers and shit like that.
Yeah,
Um, in terms of like, every custom car doesn't have to be raced.
yeah. Like
Uh,
a custom car could actually be like a smooth cruiser that it's like feels comfortable and gets around and doesn't cost too much to drive, has a good stereo, decent climate control system, airbags, or maybe not airbags, but maybe ABS. Airbags are pretty nice though. Actually, I'm not gonna lie. Every time I see a video of some idiot driving too fast and causing a wreck, and some poor sap who gets like sideswiped and then goes careening off into a barrier, and their airbags save their lives and they walk away from it, it's like, man, that's a lucky person. And that asshole over there, I hope that they weren't wearing their seatbelt and got punched really hard in the stomach. Because fucking assholes. Speaking of crazy people, so, you know, on the way up to the wedding this weekend, I was I haven't driven on the interstate in a while, like it during, peak traffic of any kind, especially not 65 the 65 northbound corridor towards Chicago, like in a long time. So I'd forgotten just how like crazy it is and how easy it is to get swept up into 80-mile-an-hour traffic. And then how hard it is to, or difficult it can be just to like tuck into in between some semis and get out of that shit, because people are crazy. Like, I don't know how, if you noticed just how much tailgating occurs at 80 miles an hour. But when I would finally like had enough of trying just to maintain the go along with the flow of traffic and just hang out between semis, I saw like group after group of cars that were traveling like a tight accordion, like one
yeah,
after another.
it was pretty bad. And then there's always these people who are like, "Oh, 80 isn't fast enough," and it's like, the speed limit was 70, and people are going 80, and then there's always some motherfucker who's like, "I need to go 90, I need to go 100," and they end up being the person who's like weaving in and out of traffic,
At 80 plus
and
miles an hour.
yeah, and it's like
Ah.
I, they're infrequent enough where everybody doesn't end up in an accident, but they're frequent enough where we were, just fine. But then I'm sure it was one of those types of people that caused an accident in terms of like, um, we got stuck in traffic for like in half an hour because there was 3 car pileup. You know, it must have been about 30 miles ahead of us, and then all that traffic accumulated in front of us as like the accordion, basically.
Yeah.
And then it took, half an hour to catch up to it because we only ended up, once we hit traffic, we moved about a mile and then the traffic was over. So that's where, thinking about just the way that the physics works, yeah, it must have been like 30 miles ahead of us. And then it goes, they took it down to 1 lane because of their fucking idiocy. So then it's like the way Americans are so individualist in their cars, and then they don't want to like work together when it comes to like merging. So then effectively everybody has to come to a fucking stop at that point, instead of flowing smoothly. So that's where uh watching the way that these traffic pileups happen for all the various reasons, and including people just not being able to like pay attention to other vehicles so they don't brake when other people do, and they don't let off the brakes when other people do. It's like if everybody just let off the brakes at once, like, oh, the car in front of me let off the brakes, I'm gonna let off my brakes, and the car behind me. And that's sort of like acknowledgement of the person in front of me doing something, so I'm gonna react to them. Americans are so out of touch with even the car in front of them. That's where I think a lot of the traffic comes from, in terms of like when you go to other countries that have more cars on the street but less stopping in the traffic. It's like there's something to that in terms of there's way more cars on the street in a lot of places in India, but the traffic isn't just sitting fucking still in a lot of those places. So,
Oh man, videos of traffic in India is the craziest. I thought China was crazy. The roads, because in China there's a lot of cars and they're all going really slow, and people let people change lanes whenever they signal, and it's very cool. It's very unlike traffic in America. I had never seen traffic like that. And then when I watch videos of traffic in India, that stuff's nuts.
oh, it's completely different. It's completely different, and that's where
They got
having been
three-wheel
in it.
bikes and
Oh yeah,
motorcycles and
yeah, yeah.
bicycles and the
2 in 1
roundabouts.
lane,
2 in 1, yeah.
where you're like, I don't know how this is physically possible, but I guess it's happening.
And it's like a tour bus and a semi,
Yeah. So
and then a
all
motorcycle
kinds of shit
splits
happens
between them.
where I was definitely like scared that we were gonna get in an accident, but we didn't. And it was like the driver was so nonchalant about it in terms of the shit that if you're not used to it, an American wouldn't be able to function in that traffic, let alone not have an anxiety attack and break down from what it does. But this, the drivers there, just that's what they deal with, which is also where there's not as many lights. In turn, there's like more roundabouts, so there's a lot less uh head-to-head collision chance. But it could still, there's plenty of ways to get in an accident, let alone pileups happen on the same side of the road a lot of times. So it could be way worse, but they're they're more aware of other people on the road just in general, which is what I noticed in terms of like the drivers there that I rode with. Um, it was like just a different kind of awareness that Americans just don't have. Maybe no, not even in LA. LA people don't really give a fuck about other drivers either. They're almost worse. So there's just not really many places in America where drivers consider other people, and they're all just worried about themselves, whether it's like because they're speeding, because they're going too slow, or fucking making some shit move. It's all just because they're concerned for themselves, where it's not necessarily that Indian drivers are concerned for other people. They're just aware, they're at least aware of them. Whereas Americans, it's like, oh, I'm in my car. Whatever's a foot in front of me is what I acknowledge as existing. Anything out of that is not, it's not important to me.
I think on the simplest level, though, and the American driving culture is concerned with just only concerned with what's in front of them. Because if everyone else is doing what they're doing, then it should all work. I guess I don't know.
Well, but like a foot in front of them, not 500 feet, just like a foot.
Oh
Like
yeah, I mean, like
I was on the road earlier today, and somebody fucking came up on my tail, where I'm like, were they just not? Were you not gonna stop? What they didn't hit me, but
they got real close, uncomfortably
real
close.
They ended up switching lanes and then almost hitting the person in the other lane. But I'm just like, what? Did you not see the cars in front of you? Like, but that's just what it felt like. It felt like they didn't see the cars in front of them.
And that's like the reason I hate driving around town. It sucks. We're at this stage where all the cars are crazy, technologically sophisticated, and can accelerate like mad, can stop on dimes and turn like they're on rails, and as long as it's dry out, I mean, and people know it, and everyone's surrounded by airbags, so it's like, oh, who cares? Insurance. It could actually be a lot worse because I don't see an accident every time I drive somewhere. I see a lot of, near collisions. I don't actually see a bunch of pileups all the time. Maybe I'm really lucky in that regard.
Yeah, it's lucky not to see them.
Yeah. I know they happen.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.